If dat fella Schuster had been good enough for Big Chief Bitterbuck, Dell reckoned, Schuster would be good enough for him. No, what he cared about, you've guessed already, I'm sure, was what was going to happen to Mr. Jingles after he, Delacroix, passed on. I was used to spending long hours with the condemned on the night before their last march, but this was the first time I'd spent those long hours pondering the fate of a mouse. Dell considered scenario after scenario, patiently working the possibilities through his dim mind. And while he thought aloud, wanting to provide for his pet mouse's future as if it were a child that had to be put through college, he threw that colored spool against the wall. Each time he did it, Mr. Jingles would spring after it, track it down, and then roll it back to Dell's foot. It started to get on my nerves after a while, first the clack of the spool against the stone wall, then the minute clitter of Mr. Jingles's paws. Although it was a cute trick, it palled after 90 minutes or so. And Mr. Jingles never seemed to get tired. He paused every now and then to refresh himself with a drink of water out of a coffee saucer Delacroix kept for just that purpose, or to munch a pink crumb of peppermint candy, and then back to it he went. Several times it was on the tip of my tongue to tell Delacroix to give it a rest, and each time I reminded myself that he had this night and tomorrow to play the spool game with Mr. Jingles, and that was all. Near the end, though, it began to be really difficult to hold on to that thought, you know how it is, with a noise that's repeated over and over. After a while it shoots your nerve. I started to speak after all, then something made me look over my shoulder and out the cell door. John Coffey was standing at his cell door across the way, and he shook his head at me, right, left, back to center. As if he had read my mind and was telling me to think again. I would see that Mr. Jingles got to Delacroix's maiden aunt, I said, the one who had sent him the big bag of candy. His colored spool could go as well, even his house we'd take up a collection and see that Toot gave up his claim on the Corona box. No, said Delacroix after some consideration. He had time to throw the spool against the wall at least 5 times, with Mr. Jingles either nosing it back or pushing it with his paws. That wouldn't do. Aunt Hermione was too old, She wouldn't understand Mr. Jingles's frisky ways, and suppose Mr. Jingles outlived her? What would happen to him then? No, no, Aunt Hermione just wouldn't do. Well, then, I asked, suppose one of us took it? One of us guards? We could keep him right here on E Block. No, Delacroix said. He thanked me kindly for the thought, certainment, but Mr. Jingles was a mouse that yearned to be free. He, Edward Delacroix, knew this, because Mr. Jingles had, you guessed it, whispered the information in his ear. All right, I said, one of us will take him home, Del. Dean, maybe. He's got a little boy that would just love a pet mouse, I bet. Delacroix actually turned pale with horror at the thought. A little kid in charge of a rodent genius like Mr. Jingles? How in the name of Le Bon Dieu could a little kid be expected to keep up with his training, let alone teach him new tricks? And suppose the kid lost interest and forgot to feed him for 2 or 3 days at a stretch? Delacroix, who had roasted 6 human beings alive in an effort to cover up his original crime, shuddered with the delicate revulsion of an ardent anti-vivisectionist. All right, I said, I'd take him myself. Promise them anything, remember, in their last 48 hours, promise them anything. How would that be? No, sir, Boss Edgecombe, Del said apologetically. He threw the spool again. It hit the wall, bounced, spun, then Mr. Jingles was on it like white on rice and nosing it back to Delacroix. Thank you kindly, merci beaucoup, but you live out in the woods, and Mr. Jingles, he be scared to live out Don's law for tea. I know, because. I think I can guess how you know, Del, I said. Delacroix nodded, smiling. But we gonna figure this out. You bet. He threw the spool. Mr. Jingles clattered after it. I tried not to wince. In the end it was Brutal who saved the day. He had been up by the duty desk, watching Dean and Harry play cribbage. Percy was there, too, and Brutal finally tired of trying to start a conversation with him and getting nothing but sullen grunts in response. He strolled down to where I sat on a stool outside of Delacroix's cell and stood there listening to us with his arms folded. How about Mouseville? Brutal asked into the considering silence which followed Dell's rejection of my spooky old house out in the woods. He threw the comment out in a casual just an idea tone of voice. Mouseville? Delacroix asked, giving Brutal a look both startled and interested. What Mouseville? It's this tourist attraction down in Florida, he said. Tallahassee, I think. Is that right, Paul? Tallahassee? Yep, I said, speaking without a moment's hesitation, thinking God bless Brutus Howell. Tallahassee. Right down the road a piece from the Dog University. Brutal's mouth twitched at that, and I thought he was going to queer the pitch by laughing, but he got it under control and nodded. I'd hear about the Dog University later, though, I imagined. This time Dell didn't throw the spool, although Mr. Jingles stood on Dell's slipper with his front paws raised, clearly lusting for another chance to chase.